The clock has started.
I feel fine.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
I feel the liftoff.
This is a new and strange environment.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hi, I'm Kenneth, Otto, and welcome to Slightly Off Axis Podcast, where we explore the history of space travel through the stories of the workers who made it possible. And tonight, we are blessed to have with us a Silver Snoopy winner. So would you please welcome Edward Ryan. Hi, Edward.
Hi, how are you doing?
Edward has chosen to stay off camera tonight, and I want to respect his wishes. So instead of going through the regular line of questions, we will go quickly to the first question about education, and Edward will answer.
Okay. I attended school. Okay, but I'm actually a Merritt Island High School alum, and I went to some colleges and stuff when I was in the Army and in the Air Force. I graduated before I finished up with the Air Force. I graduated from Georgia Military College in Georgia with a degree in military science. Now, I realize that doesn't do you a lot of good in civilian life, but that was what my degree was in. And then later on, I attended a distance learning college and got a BSEN. So that was my that BSEN is in environmental science. So that was my extent of my education. I learned very closely on that individual certifications and targeting your education works pretty good. That was the thing that really pushed my career forward, was the individual certifications. And I'll talk a little bit more about those later on.
Okay, so I want to assure the viewers and listeners that they're not going to be seeing my face all throughout this show. We're going to go right into Edward's presentation. So here we have Edward's presentation, and I will take myself out of the picture.
And that is the good picture of me. That's about 10 years ago. So that's me. I was on a cruise, and somebody snapped a really good shot of me there. So that's the one I really like people to see. So now I'm quite a bit older and kind of worn down. So, all right, next slide, please. Okay, a lot of people ask me often, how did you get into this career? What interested you in rockets and all the rest of that sort of thing. But in my case, I was born into them. My father, when he graduated high school, which was in 1935, he went to college down in Mississippi, and he had to quit because it was a depression and he ran out of money. So he came back up to our hometown, which is in New Jersey, Ridgewood, New Jersey. It's in North Bergen County. And he got a job as an automobile mechanic. And one day he was working, and some guys came into his shop, and they wanted him to fabricate some stainless steel tubing. And the guys that walked into his shop were Lovell Lawrence, they called him Lovey, and the other guy was Hugh Pierce. And he looked at their drawings, and he took the materials they had, and he went back into the shop, and about 10 minutes later, he came out, and it was perfectly formed. And they were really, really very impressed with his work. So they asked him if he wanted to join them on Sunday when they do a test demonstration of a new engine they're working on. And my father was thinking like car engine. He said, sure, I'd love to see it. So he got with them on Sunday, and come to find out, they were building rocket engines. And they went out into a field and set this rocket engine up. And my father confided in me that it wasn't so successful. When they lit it off, it ran for about 3 seconds and then erupted into a huge fireball. So they quickly gathered up their stuff and got out of there. As some farmers were rather upset with the noise and the smells and the lights and all the rest of that sort of thing, they would pretty frequently have the gendarmes called on them. So that was their Sunday routines. But he stayed with them for a couple of years and helped them fabricate material. These 4 guys were, like I say, Lovell Lawrence and Hugh Pierce. The other guy was James Wild, and another guy, John Shasta. They were all engineers, and they were part of the American Rocket Society, which was stationed there in New York City. And they were the experimentation branch. And they started building these liquid rocket engines. Later on in 1941, just 9 days after Pearl Harbor, they got a Navy contract and established the first commercial rocket engine company in the United States, company that they named as Reaction Motors. And Reaction Motors has got a lot of history behind our space program. Many people don't know it, but a good portion of our space program actually came from the state of New Jersey. Go ahead and run the next slide, please. This is the C6000 engine that my father helped build. After my father went into the military, went into the Army Air Corps in 1939, and he was able to get out in 1944 on the point system. If you did so many flights, things, you got points. And so he got out in 1944. He went to work with Reaction Motors with these 4 guys that he worked with. And he started working on this engine. And this was the engine right here that propelled the Bell X-1. And that was a rocket plane, experimental rocket plane that was out in California. And go ahead and show the next slide, please. And that's the Bell X-1 right there. That very rocket plane, actually it's the one that broke the speed of sound, is hanging in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, the Air and Space Museum. And if you go over there, you can see it. It's a big orange rocket plane. Next slide, please. And that's Chuck Yeager, the young pilot that climbed into that thing. And with the Reaction Motors C6000 engine, he was the first person to break the speed of sound in October of 1947. Just a month later, in November of 1947, in that same aircraft, he actually became the fastest human being alive when he exceeded the speed limit of 1,000 miles per hour. Now, that doesn't sound like much to us these days, but back then it was a big deal. Go ahead, next slide, please. So that's how I got into the rocket racket. I was born into it. My father always told me, he said, "You got rocket fuel in your blood," I really didn't know what that meant when I was a young guy, but I thought it was probably something pretty special because my dad told me so. And my first
I'm going to stop and ask you a question here.
Okay, go ahead.
Is this picture a picture of you or your father?
No, that's me.
Okay.
That's me. This is goes back to 1970. I think it's 1972. When I was first my first experience with the military was actually with the U.S. Army. I was in the Army for 3 years as a combat engineer, and then I went from the Army. I decided that once I got out of the Army, I decided there was nothing going on, and I wanted to get into the Air Force because I thought the food would be better, and it was. But I also had the opportunity to to go to school for rocket engine mechanic, missile maintenance. And I did so. I went to school for 22 weeks down in Shepherd Air Force Base, Texas. And then I was assigned to Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. And that's where you can see me working on a job control board there. But I did pretty much a jack of all trades. We did everything from receipt inspections on missiles to putting them in the silo. These were the underground Titan II ICBMs. And we put them in the silo. We did the engine checks. We did put the ordnance on there. I actually had to crawl between a loaded fuel and a loaded oxidizer tank with a bomb in my hand when I installed the destruct ordnance on the rocket. And we got to launch them and test them for quite some time period. Next slide, please.
Okay, before I take the next slide, though, the viewers should know that's probably one of the most dangerous tasks you can perform is putting on the ordnance that destroys the rocket. Is that not?
It's pretty risky, yeah. The initiators on that were very temperamental, and we had to keep them shorted out so that they wouldn't go off prematurely.
Okay, and also at this time, I want to thank our viewers who are viewing live for watching. As a reminder, if you are a signed up member of YouTube or Twitch or Facebook, you can comment live on this broadcast to ask Edward questions. Okay, so now we'll go back to the slides.
Okay.
This
is what a Titan II looks like in its underground silo. The Titan II is 10 feet in diameter, and with the RV on board, it's about 117 feet. It's 103 without the RV. And this was the most, the largest weapon that was ever developed as far as an ICBM is concerned. This was the heavy attack type of thing. And it was the warhead that was on it could do extreme damage. Next slide, please. Okay, this was what the warhead looked like. We always joked about looking like a big milk can, but that was capable of producing about 9.5 megatons, which we always compared it to like World War II. If you were to take all the bombs dropped in World War II on both sides, including the bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this wing was 4 times bigger. 4 times bigger than all of the bombs dropped in World War II. Gives you some appreciation. And there was 54 of these.
Wow.
This was the cutting edge. This was the tip of the spear for nuclear deterrence. And it stayed ready between 1963 and 1987. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was on alert, ready to do its job. And fortunately, it never had to be used. I prayed that it would never have to be used, but it was never used. And eventually they were all deactivated. Next slide, please. And when they were launched, we did the test launches of these things from Vandenberg. Of course, they didn't have any weapon on board of them. They were just carrying lead. And when they took off from the silo, this is what they looked like. The silo door would open and the thing could be launched in under 2 minutes. However, he was in the silo and it was already fueled and ready to go. And if they didn't have a button to push, they had keys to turn. And it took 2 people turning keys simultaneously. And there were other fail-safes, codes, and things like that. Next slide, please. And this is what I looked like back then. In this would be 1976, I believe, when I was living in Lompoc, California.
Handsome man. I know you lost your wife, and I'm curious, is this when you met your wife, or did that come later?
No, that actually came later.
Okay.
Yeah, this was just a a place I was living at in Lompoc, California, and I was a missile maintenance technician at that point. I was going to some sort of event, but I was all dressed up in my dress blues there. So, next slide, please. And this is what the Titan II looked like when it was on its trailer. You can see it was quite large, 10 feet in diameter. The engines, that was the LR-87 engine right there. Or I can't remember, LR-87 or 91. I can't remember which one it was. But anyway, that had 2 thrust chambers to it. And it would put out about 430,000 pounds of thrust. The launch weight of the Titan II was about 330,000 pounds. So this thing here would get it out, and it would have a range of better than 6,000 miles, and an extraordinary accuracy to it. Usually accurate to within half a mile or so, but you know, how accurate do you have to be with a 9.5 megaton warhead? Okay.
Not really something to laugh about, but no, you don't have to be that accurate. You just have to get it where it's intended to go.
That's true. That's true. Okay, next slide, please. And this was the last launch of the Titan II. This was in 1977. The whole time I was at Vandenberg, we launched 14 Titan II ICBMs, about 2 a year. I was there between 1970 and 1977. And we had 2 aborts. We had the aborted B-69. There was another one, I think B-41, that aborted. But the rest of them all went off smooth as can be. And they are really, really breathtaking. I was on a launch standby team for this particular launch right here. And we were within 2,000 feet of it. And you could feel the whole ground shake and rumble as it went off. Even though this was an ICBM designed as a weapon of war, it was this exact same missile that launched the Gemini series of spacecraft. All the Geminis went up on the Titan IIs. So it was also used for peace. The Titan II eventually evolved into the Titan III, where they put strap-ons on it. And that was used both for military and civilian space exploration and space use. There was a bunch of them launched. Most of these have been deactivated or used in civilian launch now. They did have some very highly toxic propellants on board. The fuel was a combination of hydrazine and unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine, and the fuel was nitrogen tetroxide, and both were very corrosive fuels. The thing about them is they were hypergolic, which means when you bring them together, they'll explode together on contact with one another. So you really didn't need an ignition system. Very effective rocket system. It was designed and built by Martin Marietta, and the engines were put together by Aerojet General, and the guidance and electronics was put together by AC Delco. Really an outstanding piece of equipment. And the 3 bases where these things were at within the United States was, of course, Vandenberg was the test launch site. There was some used here at the Cape, but the 3 operational bases were Tucson, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona, Little Rock Air Force Base in Little Rock, Arkansas, and McConnell Air Force Base in Wichita, Kansas. And each one of those bases had 18 rockets on alert, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for over 25 years.
Now, was that rocket strictly used for this purpose, or did it have other uses besides this purpose?
Well, it was used as an ICBM primarily, but it was also used, like I say, for peaceful purposes in the fact that it was, they had the Gemini launches on it. John Young went up on the Gemini. Ed White went up on Gemini. There's a whole bunch of people that went up on Gemini, which was actually kind of the intermediate step between the Mercury program and the Apollo program. The Gemini was the one that established the fact that we could rendezvous in space and actually do spacewalks. Okay, next slide, please. A part of my job, of course, was to teach the protective equipment. When I got to KSC, I was hired on by EG&G after I retired from the Air Force in 1987. And I came down here and I retired on the 31st of October, 1987, and he immediately hired me from EG&G, Florida, as an instructor. And a part of my job was to teach people how to use these silly little suits. Now, what were the suits all about? Well, as I mentioned, the fuels and oxidizers of these things were quite corrosive. And these were the protective ensembles that the people that handled those fuels and oxidizers would have to wear in order to protect them from the corrosive effects of the fuels and oxidizers. I've trained people in these suits. The Air Force version of it, which was called a REFCO suit. These were called SCAPE suits, which stood for Self-Contained Atmospheric Protective Ensemble. And these suits have been in use out at KSC and for the Air Force, on the Air Force side, for, I'm going to say well over 30 years. And as far as I know, they're still in use today. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide.
Sorry, my microphone was off. I said something and nobody heard it. I said I was letting the viewers know that they're watching your podcast. I was giving information, so I'll change the slide now.
All right, good. Thank you. Okay. This is the way we put people in the suits. That little box that you see on the back there contains cryogenic liquid air. And it contains 8 liters of it, which would allow the person to breathe in the suit for a period of about 2 hours. But it was extremely cold. It was minus 318 degrees. And we would hook up a series of manifolds in the suit, which had like air conditioning umbilicals that went through the suit that blew air in through the helmet and to each of the extremities that pressurized the suit and made it positive pressure. The suit itself weighed, depending on the function and the means that it was hooked up to, the type of air supply. As you see it with that box on the back, the box weighed about 40 pounds, and the suit itself probably weighed around 25. So a person was about 65 pounds. The bigger the suit, of course, the bigger the more weight it was. So it was anywhere between 62 to 68 pounds, generally speaking. It also had, some of them used radio headsets. A lot of them used plug-in type headsets. So whenever you went someplace, you plugged in and talked. You could talk to your supervisor or the team leader and to each one of the other people by a press-to-talk switch that was hooked through the outside of the suit. Okay, next slide, please. And my job was to teach them how to use it. Climbing a ladder doesn't seem like much of a project until you come to realize that you're climbing a ladder with about 60 pounds of suit on you, and you can't see your feet because of the extremely limited vision on these helmets. You could only see about 120 degrees side to side and very little looking down and almost nothing looking up. So it made it very difficult to do things like climb ladders. And was a part of my job was to make sure that these folks learned how to do it without falling down and becoming injured. We taught them how to climb ladders. We taught them how to move in the suits, how to climb stairs, pretty much every kind of normal movement that you take, even things like we'd tell them don't ever walk backwards, turn around and walk forward where you can see where you're going. But if you're walking backwards, you can't see. So your chances are you're going to fall and hurt yourself. So it's pretty interesting. I trained these suits between 1987 and 20. Actually, I trained them all the way up through 2018. Next slide, please. This is the suit when it's used in the airline mode. And they could hook up 300 feet of airline to each of the people so that they could move around. This one, you didn't need the backpack with. So it worked pretty nice. Okay, next slide, please. And of course, one of the biggest things was decontaminating the suit, because if there was any rocket propellant or anything like that that was open, and it got on the suit, as soon as you tried to come out of the suit, then of course you would be affected by the propellant. So we had to teach them how to take a shower. Not only that, but the shower was also used to cool the suit. A lot of times it got very warm in there. So next slide, please. And this is just another shot. Next slide, please. I also did all the occupational respiratory protection training, which is all the things like negative pressure respirators, the little ones you see that painters use, and full face piece respirators. You might see some construction workers use those things, and self-contained breathing apparatus like firefighters use, and airline respirators, which some type of painters use as well. Some insulators use them. But we had to fit test all the masks. And back in 1988, I was able to convince the management of EG&G that using a development called quantitative fit testing was much better to determine the fit of the respirator on the person's face than merely using what they call isolamyl acetate. We call it banana oil, and having them do the sniff test. We'd put them in a bag and put this banana oil in there and have them do exercises, and they'd tell us whether or not they could smell it. Well, unfortunately, that wasn't a real good means of determining the level of the fit. These machines, like you see right here, were much better because they quantified the level of leakage in the mask, and they could make very accurate determinations as to what that leakage was. And we started out with one machine, and the thing of it is these were built by TSI Incorporated, and we bought the 23rd machine ever built. So we were right at the very beginning. And we worked with two machines for a long time, and eventually we got all the machines right here that you could see. These are 5 of the fit test machines we have. I think they got like 8 of them now that they use. But this is a method of fit testing which is used today at KSC and other places throughout the country. Next slide, please. A part of our job as instructors back then would be to take people into the various different facilities. We take them into the OPF, orbiter processing facilities. We'd take them into the VAB. We'd take them into all the facilities, even the ones in the headquarters and the KSC industrial area. And we'd actually do physical walk downs with them. One of my favorite places to take them was the pad. And I'd always try to explain to them, this was the 195-foot level of pads A and B. And I always try to explain to them that what you're looking at here is going out on a limb. You know, most people, when you hear them say they're going out on a limb, it means they're taking some degree of risk. Well, this was the walkway that led you to the orbiter vehicle itself. It was probably, by the time you included the white room, maybe about 100 feet long. But it kind of stuck out there all by its lonesome. And this was the only thing that attached the orbiter to the fixed service structure. complex. When the rotating service structure was pulled back, there was no contact. This was the only way the astronauts could get from the orbiter to the fixed service structure and vice versa, the only way they could get to the orbiter. This was done immediately before launch, and I kind of always like to think of it as going out on a limb. You may notice on the floor there, it looks like yellow paint. We called that the yellow brick road. That was directions from the for the astronauts or anybody to get from that from the space shuttle. If they have to get out in a hurry, they could follow the yellow brick road, and it would take them to the slide wire baskets, where they could jump in the slide wire basket and break the seal, and it would take them down to the bunker. And we'll show you a little bit about slide wire baskets in the bunker later on, but that's the way they did it. But we called that the yellow brick road, and this was going out on a limb. Okay, now, yeah, you can go to the next slide. Not only did I teach the various different walk downs of the facilities and escape people and respirators, but I also started doing many of the industrial hygiene courses. As I went through my first 4 or 5 years, I went to many specialized training events, such as asbestos. Here I am teaching people how to work with asbestos materials like asbestos floor tiles and things like that. I started teaching hearing conservation. I started teaching the OSHA lead standard and cadmium standards. I targeted my education toward the specific type of work that I was doing. For example, I attended the National Safety Council's Safety Training Institute, which was 5 weeks. And I wound up with an advanced safety certificate as a result of that. That was kind of rare to get. It was very difficult to get. In addition to which, I went to OSHA Training Institute provider, and I got certified, or not really certified, but authorized as an OSHA instructor in the general industry standards and in the construction industry standards. So I was an authorized instructor to conduct 10 and 30 hour hazard awareness courses in construction and in general industry. In addition to which, I attended the course from Georgia Tech, so we call it Georgia Tech Recurring Institute, and that was where I went for a competent person training for occupational respiratory protection. I was proud to say that I aced their test there. That's not often done. And I also went to the UF Florida Trio for the asbestos certifications as an asbestos supervisor and competent person. So a lot of my training was aimed at my specific type of work. But then I went for the granddaddy of them all. And that was the CET, which initially stood for Certified Environmental Trainer. That was offered by the National Environmental Training Association. And I sat for the test that they took. You had to take the base test, which was on training administration and documentation and that sort of thing. And they also had to take one competency area, which I actually took 3 competency areas. So my test was 250 questions, and it took 4 hours to do it. And I had to go all the way up to Indianapolis, Indiana, to take that test. I did that in 1992, and I passed all those tests in the 90 percentile range and was awarded the CET and the CIT. CET stood for Certified Environmental Trainer, and the CIT was Certified Instructional Technologist. In addition to which, I was certified in the areas of OSHA rules and standards. I was certified in hazard communications, and I was also certified in hazardous waste operations and emergency response. hazardous materials emergency response. So that was those were the big areas I got into, and those really helped to propel my career forward. Now later on, those certifications would become recognized by the Board of Certified Safety Professionals, and they became like a sister certification to the much sought after CSP, which is Certified Safety Professional. The CET and the CSP essentially became parallel certifications. And it was just as difficult to get the CET as it was to get the CSP. But I held that certified CET for, they changed the name of it a little bit. They call it the Certified Environmental Safety and Health Trainer, but they still called it CET. And I held that certification for over 25 years. So I was very proud of that. There were not a lot of CETs in the state of Florida. I think I was the 11th one made when I received my CET. Next slide, please. And this is what that was all about. This was doing training for hazardous waste or hazardous materials emergency response. In case there's a spill of something or something that's hazardous, we train people on how to recognize what the hazards were, do some evaluation as to what needed to be done to clean it up, to actually take the cleanup activities and to restore the area to normal as much as possible. We taught them all about the equipment to wear, decontamination, determinations as to what had spilled. We'd go over the National Emergency Response Guidebook, and all the rest of that sort of thing. Next slide, please.
Okay, before I do that, Edward, I have received a question from another gentleman known as Edward.
Okay.
And he asks, ask him, weren't you the most famous for throwing a stuffed pig to students? They would need to answer a question from the class content in order to be allowed to throw that back.
For throwing a what?
He asked if you were famous for throwing a stuffed pig in the direction of students, and then in order for them to throw that pig back at you, they had to answer a question from the class content.
No, I don't think that was me. I can't ever recall doing that.
Well, he says I learned a lot from his classes and he made it fun. So
yeah, but I can't ever recall doing that. I may have, who knows, because it's been so many years ago. But I do remember when I was giving classes and stuff like that. I would have the students pass off the question from one to another. In other words, I would hand the student the question and they would have to ask the co-student. I'd have them work in teams and all the rest of that sort of thing. So I used to, like I say, I used to train a lot of different classes. By the time it was all over with, I was trained in over 40 different courses, 45 different courses. Everything from hazardous materials to asbestos and lead and cadmium and confined space entry and all the rest of that sort of thing.
With all of the complex parts of any rocket or any shuttle, though, I mean, there had to be a lot more than just 45 courses.
Oh, yeah. Yes, there was. But see, there was actually 3 different companies that did the training out there. Ours was the base operations side of it. And then the people that actually did training for the specific technicians, that was Lockheed, and then they became USA. So they did a lot of their own technical training. Now, they attended a lot of our courses too. Like, for example, we used to train Red Crew, fire prevention and fire, how to put out fires and things. We'd actually light off fires, and the students would go out there and use both fire extinguishers and hoses to put them out. So when
the company or the organization involved with your job changed, were you able to retain your tenure?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I actually worked for 3 different companies out there. And during that time period, I never changed desks, and my seniority continued to grow through it.
Was that common for everyone to retain their tenure, or did it vary based on who they were employed by?
No, I think it was pretty common. There was something to do with the for the federal contracts that required them to carry over things like vacation time and that sort of thing. I know the only thing they messed with a little bit was sick time. A lot of times when you go from one contract to the next time, you drop some sick time. But I
Okay,
think
and the question from Ed in relation to his previous question is, was one of your co-instructors named Andre?
Yes, that's the name.
Okay,
Certainly.
well then maybe you did have him in your class. It's just been a while and hard to remember.
Yeah. He might have been thinking of another instructor that did that too. I probably did have him in my classes, because I trained thousands of people, literally thousands of people. Okay, next slide, please. And this is some of the more antiquated hazmat suits that we used to wear. This was going back to the mid 1990s. Let me just talk about the environment in which we worked back then. When I first got into the rocket racket at KSC, you have to understand there was no cell phones. There was no personal telephone number on everybody's desk. There was like 2 numbers coming into your entire division, and everybody had a phone on their desk, but a little intercom thing. And you only had 2 numbers. And usually, like in our office, we had 2 administrative people that would answer the phone. And then if somebody needed to talk to you, they would buzz you on the intercom and you'd pick up the flashing light. There was no...
So were those discrete systems, an intercom and a phone, could join together?
No, they were the intercom was on the phone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it had the buttons across the bottom, which were where it would flash, and then I had the red button, which was the intercom, and that would light up and let you know that you had a phone call waiting.
But you're saying that there are only 2 lines into the facility, 2 ringing lines.
Yep, 2 lines coming into the facility many times. Some facilities had 3, but our particular office only had 2. And another thing we didn't have email. There was no email. We didn't even have word processors. Well, I take that back. We finally got a word processor about 1990. It was called WordStar, and it was an old DOS word processor. We had 1 computer for everybody to work on at the same time, but we didn't have any email addresses. There was no email. If you needed to ask somebody to do something or get some information from somebody, we had notepads on our desk. On the notepads, we have, it had 3 copies on it, and it was called an AVO, Avoid Verbal Orders.
Okay, I'm going to stop you here. I know that you possibly can't read the tiny text on the screen, so I'm just going to repeat this comment from a viewer. It comes in from Michael Ryan. It says, best trainer and father on the planet. I may be biased, though.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. That's my youngin'. When I say youngin', he's in his 50s. But anyway, we had these things called AVOs, and if you needed to contact somebody or to get some information from them, you filled out an AVO, which was this little pad thing, and you kept a suspense copy of it. You put the other copy into an inter-office envelope, and you wrote their name on it and their mail stop on it, and you stuck it in the outbasket. Now, if you were lucky, maybe by Friday the following week, you'd get an answer back. And we actually launched space shuttles with that system. Okay. It really is amazing when you stop and think about the type of technology that we had compared to what we have today. There was no computers on everybody's desks. There was, a lot of people were still using slide rules. We really didn't, as far as training is concerned, we had slide projectors, we had overhead projectors, but we didn't have the data projectors that we have today. The equipment that we had was not as good as it is today. We had suits like this. That was a real pain to put on, I'll tell you. And it was also slow to put on. So as things progressed throughout the years, you got to understand that it wasn't until the mid-1990s that we actually started getting Windows computers in to our offices. And even then, not everybody had one. It wasn't until later on after the year 2000 that we actually started getting everybody to have laptops and things like that. But today, fortunately, it's very, very advanced. Okay, moving on to the next slide, please. This was a part of me teaching the folks how to use the respirators and the protective suits. And of course, we'd teach them how to put the suit on and seal it up so they wouldn't get affected by it. Next slide. And a lot of times they needed help. So we also had to teach the people that would be assisting them. Next slide. And a lot of times you have to understand under emergency conditions, trying to get people into those suits to protect themselves, it wasn't instantaneous. Next slide, please. And of course, then there was the problem with decontamination. A lot of times you might send two people downrange to see what was the problem, what was the spill, try to identify the materials. But it took a support team of about 25 people in order for them to do their job. They had to set these things up in advance before the first person ever stepped foot across that suspected contamination zone. Next slide, please. And then I got to train lap packs. What this young lady, this is Kay Hire, she's an astronaut, and what she is wearing there is a liquid air pack. That was unique to the Kennedy Space Center. Those particular devices were developed and designed by a life support technician who worked for the base operations contract. And they were made out of the old Air Force 1-hour escape cylinders. And they became very effective. That became the primary breathing apparatus for both the closeout crews and the fire rescue, astronaut fire rescue crews as well. Next
I'm going to ask a question here and potentially expose my ignorance, but was that liquefied oxygen like LOX, as in what's used to propel the rocket in space, or is it something totally different?
It was actually a combination of, we called it liquid air. It was 80% nitrogen and 20% oxygen. And it was actually 78% nitrogen, rather 22% oxygen. And it was a blended air. It was minus 318 degrees. And the thing about using liquid air was the fact that it was a very desirable way to carry a huge amount of air in a very small space. The expansion ratio on that air to sit between its minus 318 degree temperature to its breathable temperature at 68 degrees was about 729 to 1. That means 1 liter of liquid air turns into 729 liters of breathable air at 65 degrees. So it was a very effective way of breathing a lot of air. Next slide, please. You can see my job was to teach these folks how to put these things on over and over and over again until every person on the team could get into these things from basically a stored position until they had it like this and ready to go with a thumbs up in less than 30 seconds. Because if you have to hold your breath because it was a release of some type of material, such as nitrogen, for example, you can't breathe that stuff in at all because you'll pass out very quickly, less than a second or two. So they had to stop breathing and put the mask up to their face and get these things running, and then put them on their back and get ready to become effective team members in order to effect a rescue of astronauts or whoever else was up there, and do it in less than 30 seconds. So we practiced until they got it right. I spent a lot of time with those folks. Next slide, please. It wasn't all work, okay? In the year 2000, I had the opportunity to go back to my old hometown of Ridgewood, New Jersey, which is in North Bergen County. And the person that was up there was Garrett Reisman. And I knew Garrett because I'd trained him. And he was up there to give a speech for the overall parade, which the theme of their parade was "The Dream is Alive." And I was asked to give a keynote address to the swearing in ceremony of 50 brand new U.S. citizens. And I had the opportunity to make up a speech for it. And the speech was called "Let It Begin Here." And it talked about the back in time of the Lexington and Concord battles at the start of the Revolutionary War. And if anybody ever wants to get a copy of it, they can get in touch with me and I'd be happy to send it to them.
What a great honor for you, sir.
It really was. It was a lot of fun. We got together. We spent the day together, Garrett and I did, and we had breakfast and lunch and went swimming and all kinds of good stuff. It was a lot of fun, and we got to enjoy the fireworks display. Except for Garrett had to do another speech. I didn't have to, but he did just before the fireworks display. But it was a great time. Next slide, please. And this is proof that I actually can do a speech. And that's Garrett sitting over there next to me. And it was a great time. We had a very, very interesting time period there. It was very good. Next slide, please. Okay, now here's where I'm getting into training astronauts and closeout crews. That guy standing right next to the phone there is Bob Benkin. He's an astronaut. And these are the closeout crews. These folks have served not only as flight crews, but they also serve as astronaut support personnel, which means they're a part of the closeout crew. They also do what they call C-square, which is basically they come to the Kennedy Space Center and do pretty much anything everybody wants them to do. So this is where we were doing bunker training for the closeout crew and the ASPs. Next slide, please. And the guy that's standing next to me there, or actually kneeling next to me with a mask on his face, that's Butch Wilmore. Butch was in the process of learning how to use one mask to get all the way from the white room to the safe area. And the way that worked was the fact that we had different air supplies that a person could use. It started out with the lap pack, which is that white box sitting there. And they could put that on in the white room. They would go to the slide wire basket. They'd ride the slide wire down. The astronauts would come with them. The astronauts had their own air supply called ARAP bottles. And By the time they got into the bunker, their supplies might be more limited, so they could go directly from the liquid air pack to a hose line respirator, which was fed by a big cylinder bank outside. And they could stay in there for a protracted period of time on that. But then when it came time to leave, if their lap pack was somewhat depleted, they could go directly to a SCBA, which is a self-contained breathing apparatus with the same mask. And so it was my job to teach them how to go from mask to mask, or from supply to supply to supply without having to disturb the mask. And next slide, please. And this is Butch getting ready to pull up the air pack. Next slide. And there he is putting the air pack on. And you can see he's already attached his regulator from the air pack to the supply air system. Next slide. As a result of doing that, of standardizing the masks, I also taught him a way to switch out the ELSA cylinders. ELSA stood for Emergency Life Support Apparatus. That was a steel cylinder that contained breathable air and a plastic hood and a hose going from the cylinder to the hood. I trained them on a way that they could switch out, for an injured person, cylinders going from one cylinder to the next without ever having to disturb the hood. And as a result of those types of things, I won the Manned Space Flight Awareness Honoree Position Award, which was NASA's second highest award. And this was in 2002, April of 2002. And
congratulations to you, sir.
That was my official photograph for the Manned Spaceflight Awareness Honoree. Next slide, please. And this is me training my honor flight. That was Sts-111, and Kevin Cockrell was the commander of that flight. You can see him off to the left, and that's me talking about the hose lines and the connections and all the rest of that sort of thing. The person whose head is in the back there, that's Franklin Chang Diaz. Franklin flew on, I think, 7 shuttles. I think he flew on. Really nice guy. Next slide, please. This is at the reception for the award ceremony, and this was that was Scott Kelly standing there next to me. We were chit-chatting, and the astronauts were wandered around congratulating all the awardees. Next slide, please. And that was Tracy Caldwell. I always liked Tracy. She was a lot of fun, and she had a great sense of humor. And Tracy and I are this is Tracy and I at the reception. In fact, I got a little funny story about that a little bit later on. Next slide, please. Okay. Matter of fact, take back to Tracy's slide there. I might as well tell you about this right now. When we had the opportunity to go to Houston, all the award winners from KSC, and they flew us over to Houston, and they took us around to the various different parts of the Houston Space Center, everything that the astronauts went through. And we went to the building. They flew you and your spouse out there. And my wife, Judy, was a small person, and she's about just barely 5 feet high. And it was really funny. We went to the trainer area where they had the various different mock-ups and trainers, and it had the space shuttle mock-up in the horizontal position there. And in order to get into the shuttle, it's not like going through a door. It's like a little tunnel. Okay, there's a little hatchway there, and you got to crawl in through the door. And everybody was on the mid deck, And I crawled through there because I crawled through them before. And my wife was on the outside. And she was trying to tell Tracy, I'm a little reluctant to doing this. And the reason she was reluctant was the fact that happened to be the day that she wore a dress. So crawling through the tunnel, it was going to be a little awkward. So, so we just kind of, Tracy and I just kind of stood over the tunnel there close to the receiving side of the tunnel as my wife crawled through there, because it was really kind of awkward getting down from that tunnel to the floor of the mid deck in a dress. So when we were on the mid deck, and we climbed the ladder. I climbed the ladder to get up to the flight deck. And I asked my wife, turned around, looked down at my wife. I said, "You going to come up here and take a look at the flight deck?" And she kind of looked up at me and she shook her head no. And she said, "Listen, I don't mind if people take a look at my keister, but I'd like to keep my private parts private." So she didn't climb the ladder, but I went up on the flight deck, which was not the first time, by the way, I'd ever been in an actual, that was a mock-up shuttle, but I've actually been in the actual shuttles. So my first shuttle I ever sat in was Atlantis, and I sat in on the pilot's seat.
There has to be a certain level of people involved in having any private interaction with an astronaut on that level. Is there a designation for that type of person?
Well, not really. There was.
I guess what I'm really getting at is it a case of when they are in the dressing room, is it just other astronauts, or are there other people involved at
there's
most sensitive of levels?
Oh yeah, there are other people involved all the way through it.
But like when we're talking the undergarments that take care of the human waste product, is there somebody involved in that, or are they putting it on themselves?
Well, yes, no, there's suit techs that assist them with that. There's not really a lot of places you can be bashful with the protective garments when you're going into space. So I kind of teased my wife afterwards. I says, that was the first time you ever showed the astronauts the moon. So anyway, next slide, please. So here's another little story. The next day, my wife and I were in a gallery of mission control, and this happened to be the ISS mission control. And we had just gotten in there. We sat down to mission control, and you could see all the controllers down there, and you could see all the consoles and all the rest of that sort of thing. And no sooner did we sit down, and this old guy comes in and sits down and sits right next to my wife. And before you know it, the two of them are sitting there chit-chatting like a couple of old college chums. And he's explaining to her what's going on and who's doing what and all the rest of this sort of thing. And my wife was bragging to him. She says, my husband trains all the astronauts. And he looked over and he said, I think I've heard that. And they talked for like 20 minutes. Back and forth, just like old chums, like old pals. And finally he stood up and he said, I got to get back to work. He said, my break's over. They're going to come looking for me. So he shook her hand and he said, I hope you have a nice time here. And he patted her on the shoulder and he walked out.
My wife didn't tell her who he was.
My wife looked over at me and she says, who was that? I said, well, let me explain something to you, dear. That guy flew on Gemini twice. He went to the moon twice. He flew around the moon one time and brought it home. And then the next time he landed on the moon and spent some time in the moon dust. I said, and then after that, he was the first person to command a space shuttle.
Astronaut John Young from Orlando, Florida.
That's right. He flew on STS-6 as a commander as well. I said, have you ever heard of John Young Parkway? And she says, yeah. I said, well, you just met John Young. So that was.
So what
that was-
did she do after that? Did she turn all shades of red?
No, not really. She is. Well, she's a person who's had. I can't remember which STS number it was, but it was Elaine Collins' crew. Sign a birthday card to her, and she cherished that birthday card. Every one of the crew signed a birthday card to her and said, "Wishing you a happy birthday." And she got this birthday card. She's like, "Who are all these people?" And then she saw the thing says STS. I can't remember what number it was, but she saw Elaine Collins' name, and she just cherished that card. we still have it, and she just thought that was the most terrific thing. So, next slide, please.
That was a great story. I'm glad you have all these side stories to tell us in addition to all the wonderful details of your career, sir.
Thank you. Oh, and then, of course, then there was the times that weren't so good. This was the Sts-107 Crew. And they were just wonderful people. I trained every one of them. The only person I did not train as an astronaut candidate was Ilya Ramon. He was the Israeli astronaut, but the rest of them I all trained as astronaut candidates. Next slide, please.
Here and ask, were you involved with the astronauts that were on the Challenger as well, or did you not have any involvement with them due to your work
Challenger.
assignment?
Yeah, not Challenger. I was still in the Air Force when Challenger blew up, but it bothered me. It bothered a lot of people in the space industry. It bothered a lot of people in the Air Force. It's the fact that we were in the same industry effectively that upset so many people.
As an armchair astronaut watcher, Challenger was a little bit more expected, and I guess we had a lot of input from the news media, not all of it accurate. But this mission, to me, sir, was quite different. In fact, we weren't even, watching it because it happened during the landing. And I recall, we didn't have anything turned on and watching it. And I think my mother was watching it, or somebody called her or something of that sort and said, the shuttle just disintegrated. And we were like in shock because that had happened again.
Yep. Let me tell you what my story was there. I was sitting out on the back porch drinking a cup of coffee. And I was reading the newspaper, waiting for the shuttle to come back in because I knew it was coming in. And I was kind of watching my watch and kind of looked up. I didn't have the TV on or anything. And all of a sudden the phone rang. And it was my coworker. And he said, "Are you watching TV?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Turn on your TV." He says, "The shuttle's in trouble." So I turned on the TV and I got there and they were talking about the lockdown and the fact that it may have disintegrated. They didn't know for sure. And it bothered me, still bothers me. I cried out, "Oh God, no." My wife came down the stairs and she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "They've lost my crew." It's personal. It's very personal.
Yeah, that's the reaction that I've received from others that I've interviewed, is that there's a personal attachment.
Yep.
And I believe it was this mission that there was much more personal attachment because there were a lot of letters and things from the families that were present at the gathering area for the astronauts, and like they were visibly there. And
Yes.
after the accident, all of that stuff is there, almost like, amplifying the whole event, just as memorials nowadays for someone at a tragic event of any other sort The memorials are always there, and you have to walk by it, and so you're touched completely by it.
Yep. People don't understand sometimes how close we get to the crews, and especially people don't understand how close we actually get to the machines as well. Let me put it to you this way: the Space Shuttle Columbia was very affectionately, and pardon my language for this, but she was very affectionately referred to as Fat Ass. And the reason why we called her that was because she was the first shuttle off in production, and she had some extra beams in the aft section of the shuttle, which made her heavier than any of the other shuttles. So we always referred to her as FA. People don't seem to understand that most people probably have never even heard of that, but that was the way we thought about them.
Right, and as I understand from my first interview with my first guest, Joyce Rosemary, it was the fact that it was the first shuttle and the fact that it did weigh more, that prevented it from being able to go and dock with the ISS.
That's correct.
It was structurally unable to dock with the ISS.
Yep, that's exactly correct.
So they could not go to the ISS to therefore rescue the crew.
Well,
they had a chance returning to Earth with the hope that nothing was going to happen.
Yeah, well, not only that, but they were in a whole different orbit too. So they wouldn't have had enough fuel to do that. But anyway, there was always private nicknames for all the orbiters, and like Endeavour, they called Brittany. That's because she was never ready. There was little pet things like that were in this system that, that made it exciting. It made it exciting, and it made it personal.
Do you think that's the reason why Bob and Doug really called their first capsule with SpaceX Endeavour, or you just think that there was the name recognition of going from Endeavour, the shuttle, to Endeavour, the capsule?
Yeah, I don't know whether they named their first capsule or if that was done by Musk. I don't know.
They did the naming. They were given the right to name it. Yeah.
I'll have to ask Doug if I see him again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really nice, I mean, surely you know a lot of astronauts, but it's just fascinating to me for you to have those two in this slideshow.
Yeah. Next slide, please. This was the 107 crew right here. I want to talk a little bit about the guy that's sitting up on top of that M113 there. The guy that's that was Willie McCool. And he was an Air Force colonel and a test pilot. And we always joked about Willie. We said that he was, we always said he had the mind of a 12-year-old that was trapped in the body of a 15-year-old. He was very youthful looking and extremely inquisitive about everything. He had to know how everything worked. The first time he laid eyes on a lap pack, he was like, how does this work? He was picking my brain to pieces, trying to tell me, how does this work? How does this, But he was a terrific individual, one of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. And the guy in the little darker suit right there in the center, that's George Harger. He's the fire trainer. And George trained almost as many astronaut crews as I did. And George passed away a few years ago. But that was the method that they used to get from the bunker where I trained him to the safe zone. And that was the entire crew. And bless their souls. Next slide, please. This was the largest astronaut group that I trained. I trained all astronaut groups from group 13 to group 20, 8 groups in total. This was the largest group. There were 44 astronauts in this group. If you look the third row up on the extreme right-hand side, there was Willie McCool right there. This group had 44, let me put it to you this way, I had 43 outstanding astronauts and one knucklehead. She was the first person who was not only grounded, but fired from the astronaut corps. And I'm not going to get into that, but she's no longer a part of the system. Next slide, please. And this was what we used to train them on. We used to train them to get from the White Room in the event of an emergency with the assistance of, or without the assistance of, the closeout crew, or by themselves, or sometimes the astronaut rescue teams. But we trained them how to do that. And it wasn't just me. It wasn't just the base operations trainer. There was USA trainers and everybody involved, suit techs and all the rest of that. So the USA folks held a majority of the responsibility for the procedures on the evacuation. We held the responsibility for the firefighting equipment, such as the fire X sprays and using the hoses and things like that. We had to train them how to do that. And we also trained them all of the breathing air equipment in the bunker. So that was our primary job. But this is the way they would get down there on these carts that would come down. So next slide, please. And that's me training the crew in the bunker. That's Mark Kelly over there in the extreme right-hand side. I can't even remember which crew this was. But that's me training them on the hose lines and stuff like this. This shot probably goes back to the, I'm going to say maybe 1994, 95, maybe. I think it was maybe 95. Next slide, please. And this is Randy Bresnick. He was a part of the 100th crew that I trained. And a darling man, absolutely darling. Just we always got together. Anytime I went by, he'd chit chat with me, and we'd talk back and forth. And just a delightful individual. Next slide, please. And this was my 100th crew right there. It was Craig Hassel was the. Charlie Hassel was the commander, and Butch Wilmore was the pilot. Also standing there on the very end is Leland Nelvin. Now, Leland has a picture of him with his two dogs. He has these two big old, I think they were Irish setters or something like that, but it's a remarkable picture. And then, of course, Randy Bresnick is in there. And it was just, that was my 100th flight crew that I trained. And that took between 1988 all the way up to I think it was 2009, 2010. Next slide, please. And it just so happened that as soon as we finished the training, the young lady that is my scheduler, she came roaring out there in a government vehicle and jumped out and had this big cake. And we all split up the cake. And the astronauts and I sat there and ate cake, and the life support technicians and a few of the other people that were involved. And we all sat around and had a cake for my 100th crew. So it was really quite an amazing event right out there at Launch Complex 39A. No, excuse me. It was 39A. Next slide, please. This was the official party that they had for me. This was a couple of weeks later. The official party that they had for me. And as a matter of fact, I also happened to be the welcoming home party for Sts-128 Crew. And they had me this nice little plaque. I still have it hanging on the wall in here. about training my 100th crew. And they had a big cake there too. And we all had dinner and stuff like that. Next slide, please. And that was me with the Sts-128 crew. Now, this is an interesting story. The Sts-128 crew, you could see that Fred Stukow was the commander, and Ken Ford was the pilot. And on the very end over there is Pat Forrester. But the guy that I always really hit it off pretty good with was Jose Jimenez. He's the short little guy right over there. This crew was supposed to be my 100th crew, but my wife had a better idea. I had been planning for over a year to take her to Hawaii, to Waikiki Beach. So instead of training this crew, which conflicted with our trip to Hawaii, I've decided Hawaii was probably the smarter move, since I have to live with that woman and I don't have to live with these guys. But they were there to celebrate my 100th launch crew with me, which was the following crew, 129. And over there was Jose Jimenez, who happens to be one of the most maligned astronauts by the news media. The news media keeps calling him an immigrant. He is not an immigrant. Evidently, the news media in this country doesn't know the difference between a migrant and an immigrant. An immigrant is a person who moves from one country to another with the intention of setting up residency. A migrant is a person who moves from place to place to follow work. And there's a lot of occupations that have migrants. Farm workers, for example, construction workers, oil workers, that type of thing, all have migrant communities. And Jose was born in California. He was a U.S. citizen. His family were migrant workers, and he followed them and worked with them until later on, when he became more educated and wound up by becoming an astronaut. So, but the news media keeps calling him an immigrant. He is not an immigrant. So I don't know when they'll ever get that right.
Well, I'm sure he appreciates your correction.
I'm telling you, it's poor guy. He continuously gets maligned by the news media. Okay, next slide, please. This was during the training of STS-135, the last launch. This is me and my training crew. And that thing that we're standing underneath there, that is the tail section to Atlantis. You can see the big red thing there. That is one of the SSMEs, Space Shuttle main engines. And we just decided to go over there and get a shot underneath the tail section. Next slide, please. This is me standing in the White Room at the hatch to Atlantis. And this was during the STS-135 training. And it's my last opportunity to stand in the White Room. Next slide, please. This is the crew as they came up to the 195-foot level. And it was a very good day for everybody. Wasn't as crowded as I thought it would be. I thought it would probably be a lot more people up there, but there really wasn't as many as I thought. Everybody was very appreciative and very professional all the way through. But it was pretty relaxed too. I think the most crowded I've ever seen was when John Glenn flew, and I did train John Glenn. When John Glenn flew on the orbiter, and I can't. That place was packed with people, photographers, and it was crazy. But this group here was very easy to get along with, very easy to train. Next slide, please. And this is him in the bunker. That's Doug Hurley there at the red hat. And really good folks all the way through. So we're going to move on to the last little bit here. One more slide there, please. That's me and Doug Hurley chit chat. We're solving all the problems of the world actually right there. Didn't have anything to do with the rocket ranch. It was just chit chat back and forth. And I'm wishing him well. Next slide. This was the last crew right here, the last training bunch. It was amazing that a lot of the people that were standing there knew that in 2 weeks, when STS-135 took off, they'd have pink slips in their pocket. My folks were not part of that because we had to keep going. We became the training center for the KSC, and I was the training manager for KSC. But I made it all the way from instructor to senior instructor, and I became the supervisor of technical training, and then I became the manager of training support division. I had a division with 2 different groups underneath me, and it was quite an experience the whole time. Next slide, please. And of course, with the launch of STS-135, everybody figured, well, it was pretty much over with. And it was. I mean, we had to assist them and work through the deactivation of everything. And just finally just made my mind up, my decision that, probably nothing's going to come along very soon. So I thought to myself, well, if I'm not going to be able to help them out and get another vehicle in here, I might as well retire. So about the middle of 2012, I put in my paperwork for retirement. And I pretty much thought my experience was going to be coming over because I was going to retire on the 31st of December. But I had one more surprise in store for me. Next slide. Besides the end of the space shuttle program, next slide, that was awaiting me. 45 days before I retired on the 15th of November, I received a Silver Snoopy for training 103 of the 135 astronaut crews. Next slide, please. And of course, along with that comes a cake. And that's one of the reasons why I carry so much extra weight on me, all these cakes. So that was my congratulatory cake for the Silver Snoopy. Next
now,
slide.
are you going to explain to the audience the significance of the Silver Snoopy?
Yes, I will, as a matter of fact. The Silver Snoopy goes back to the early Apollo days. I can't think of the actual, whether it was Apollo or Gemini they first started giving away. But it was an appreciation by the U.S. Astronaut Corps for space workers who did things to enhance the safety of the astronaut course. It was not just the safety, but the efficiency as well. Those people that went above and beyond. And they've given out hundreds of them, or actually thousands of them throughout the years to deserving people. And it's, as I understand it, the applications for this are submitted by like a person's supervisor or manager, and they are all decisions are made by a NASA selection board, and then the awards are always awarded by an astronaut. Every Silver Snoopy has flown in space. My Silver Snoopy flew on STS-115. So next slide, please. And that is Dan Burbank. He was the guy that pinned me. He is, I don't know if he's the only one, but he was an astronaut that came from the Coast Guard. He was a Coast Guard astronaut. And he flew on STS, I think it was STS-115 he flew on. But an outstanding individual, really a nice guy. Next slide, please. And there's the center director and my boss, Tara Miller, and Dan Burbank and myself with the plaque for the Silver Snoopy Award. Next slide. So that's pretty much it that I can tell you about. I worked again as I retired from full-time work on the 31st of December, 2012, and I went into on-call work as an instructor and as a consultant and as a docent until 2019. And when I first joined the Air Force, which was the 8th of October, this goes back to the 50-year point. I retired on the 8th of October, 2019. So I had a full 50 years, basically from day to day, full 50 years within the space program, both in the military and in civilian life. And so folks asked me, is there anything I would do differently? The answer is no. I wouldn't have changed a minute of it. My wife always said that she never knew anybody that loved to go to work the way I did. And it's true. It's true. I look forward to every day going to work. I mean, I worked virtually, literally in the shade of the space shuttle. I've been able to do things and see things and meet people that nobody's been able to meet, I've trained and met pretty much every astronaut in the program at the time. I haven't met some of the newer ones, but all the way through the program. I've celebrated our successes, and I've been frustrated at our failures and heartbroken at the passing of various different astronaut personnel and other people as well. But it has been the most thrilling privilege of my life to be able to do this. And to think it came from a kid from Ridgewood, New Jersey, who really didn't do all that well in high school and junior high school. And somewhere along the line, somebody was looking out for me. And it became a real privilege. You have any questions for me, Ken?
Most everything you've discussed already. It's kind of, academic if I even ask a question, because it's a really, really good presentation.
Well, thank you.
I think you touched on just about everything, but the ones that I know I can ask is, how many landings, how many launches did you witness that occurred during your career? Maybe you can just touch on the ones that you didn't see.
Well, 128, I didn't see the launch for that because I was in Hawaii. There was a couple others that, for whatever reason, one of them I was hospitalized. I didn't see the launch on that. There was probably out of 110 launches that I supported, I didn't see maybe 7 of them or 8 of them of the actual launches. 103. I trained 103 astronaut crews. I saw, like I trained the Galileo and Ulysses. Mike McCullough for Galileo, commander, and that one had some RTGs on it, radioisotope thermoelectric generators. And I had to do the nuclear training program for that because it contained, each one of those contained 21 pounds of plutonium on them. And I had to train all the DOE people, Department of Energy people, and fit test them all with respirators. We had to train them on the emergency reaction plan. Did the same thing with Ulysses, which had an RTG on it. Um, those are the things that produce power to the satellite. And then I also did it for Cassini. Cassini also. Cassini was the one that went to Saturn. Galileo went to Jupiter, and Ulysses went to the sun. Pretty much any program, like the Hubble Space Telescope I was in on, almost every space program launch, Wake Shield. I can't think about or even remember them all right now, but
another question I would ask you that's an alteration of one of my usual questions. Since you did discuss being with specific astronauts in tonight's slideshow, were there other astronauts that you want to mention that were not part of the slideshow? Perhaps you didn't have a picture of them.
Oh yeah, Aline Collins. Aline Collins and I were kind of close together. She was on C-Square, and every time I go up there to train a crew, this was when we did the ELSA training in the O&C briefing room on the third floor. She'd be up there and I'd be over there too. I think one time I leaned over and I said to her, Aline, we got to stop meeting like this. People are coming in to talk. But I mean, she was an absolutely outstanding person. First female to command a space shuttle. Who else? Oh, Jesus, there's so many. There's so many of them. Mario Ronko was another one. He started out as a New Jersey state trooper. He was a house painter, and anyway, became a New Jersey state trooper. One hell of a nice individual, just a peach. And I think he did like 5 flights. Jerry Voss went 7 flights. Franklin Chang Diaz, I think, did 7 flights. Story Musgrave. I'll tell you a story about Story Musgrave. Story was completely bald, and I don't know if you knew that or not, but he was completely bald. And when I was trying to train him on the lap pack face pieces, I would tell him, when you put the face piece up to your face, make sure you use your opposite hand and pull your hair back out of the way. So you don't want to get any hair in the seal surface of the mask. You want the seal surface to go directly against your skin as much as possible, because if you have a lot of hair in that seal surface, it's going to cause a leak. And Story reaches over there and he puts his hand on his forehead from the backside and slides it across his bald head. And he says, I don't think I'm going to have to worry about that forehead hair, Ed. And I looked at him, I said, Story, you could put that mask on the back of your head and get it to seal. So we always had some fun. And I'll tell you one story about Jim Kennedy, the center director. We trained everybody. Nobody got away from our training. We used to have to go up to the center director's office to train him on ELSAs every year. And I went up to his office to train him on the ELSA. And Jim was a charming individual, one of the nicest center directors you ever want to meet. And we were talking about the ELSA. And of course, I have my canned phrases that I have to use. And we're talking about the wear of the ELSA, and I said, well, you gotta remember something, Jim. This is an escape-only device. It's not an entry device. You don't wear it into contaminated atmospheres. You wear this only if you're escaping from a contaminated atmosphere. So I said, if you hear klaxons or anything like that, go with a green and white box and open it up, take an ELSA, string it around your neck, turn it on, and put the hood on. I said, and leave the hood on until you're sure you're in clean air. So then he asked me the obvious question. He says, Ed, how am I going to know when I'm in clean air? I looked at him, I said, Jim, you're the boss. Get somebody else to take theirs off first and watch what happens. So that was a little humor. We both laughed over that. So it was a lot of fun. But they did very well. We always had good cooperation out of the center commanders and center directors. They were all terrific. I remember Bob Cabana when he flew what we kind of like called Hard Hat 1. That was the first piece of equipment to go up to the space station and link up with it was a Unity module, went up there and linked up with the module that the Russians had put up. And that was a cold December day. I trained him up there. I still remember it was how cold it was. But it's been a long time and a lot of fun. Can't say I'd do anything different.
Yeah, that alleviates a lot of questions that I normally ask our guests, but I think I have just one or two more. If you could, would you pursue space travel at your age, just to do it one time?
At my age, not in my present condition, but if I was younger and I could pursue space travel, I'd do it in a heartbeat. I would.
Do you
do
have
it
something in particular that you want to tell the audience? And I think you've elaborated on so many things. I'm going to focus this on, is there a message you want to give the audience that has nothing to do with your career? You know, something, perhaps a goal, a charity that you support, something of that nature.
Oh, I support the Wounded Warrior group. If anybody wants to give money to Wounded Warriors, I'm sure they would appreciate that. I give quite a bit of money to them. I'm being an old combat engineer myself. My grandson actually became a combat engineer as well. I know what it's like to be on a wartime footing, and it's never fun. But particularly with the people that sacrifice so much to maintain our security. So that's about the only thing I can think of. Offhand.
There's no way we can ever repair our veterans for their service. So thank you to all veterans out there.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, we're getting ready to wrap up this show. I want to thank our 6 live viewers and these others who have tuned in off and on throughout the broadcast. And thank all the viewers that tune in later to watch the show replay. And in time, I will get this out as an audio podcast as well, so you can listen to Edward's illustrious career be described wherever you go. Because I know myself, sometimes it's easier to understand what someone is saying if you simply focus on the spoken word. Thank you again for being with me, Edward. And if you stick around after the show, we'll have our short discussion time. And that's pretty much it, unless you have something else to say, sir.
No, thank you very much. And everybody have a very Merry Christmas and a very happy and prosperous New Year.
A wonderful way to go out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to roll the close to the show here, folks. So just give me 1 second to switch things up to do that. And find that little clip there. So here we go with the close to the show.
All right, liftoff and the clock has started. Roger, 0G, and I feel fine. Capsule is turning around.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
I feel the liftoff. The clock has started.
This is a new and strange environment at first. This suddenly finding yourself in orbit.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful.
So I have to take it up to hangar, Joe?
We're going to dust it off first.
So have you ever been to Disneyland?
Affirmative.
That was definitely an E-ticket.
Roger that, Sally.
3, 2, 1,
0.
and liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.